My name is Vera. I'm 32 years old. And 3 weeks ago, I got a phone call that made me question everything I thought I knew about my own life. I was in the kitchen making dinner when my cousin called me, crying so hard she could barely form words. She kept saying my husband's name. She kept saying accident and hospital and please come now. I actually laughed. I walked around the corner into the living room and looked right at him. My husband, sitting on the couch with his reading glasses on, scrolling through his phone like it was any other Tuesday night. I laughed and I told her, "That's impossible! He's right here with me!" She didn't stop crying. So I went. And when I walked through those hospital doors and saw what was waiting for me, I understood that my life had not been what I thought it was for a very long time. Before I tell you what I found, please subscribe to Heartway Stories. Hit that like button and drop your country in the comments. It helps more than you know. Now let me tell you everything. My husband's name is Adrian. We've been married for 4 years. He's an engineer, the kind of man who fixes things around the house before you even notice they're broken, who leaves coffee on the counter for you in the morning without being asked, who remembers small details about your life that you've already forgotten you told him. We met at a mutual friend's going-away party, and within 6 months I knew he was someone I wanted to keep. We got married quietly, just family, in my aunt's backyard on a Saturday afternoon. Our life wasn't glamorous. We lived in a mid-sized city, rented a house with a leaky bathroom faucet Adrian kept meaning to fix, argued occasionally about whose turn it was to do grocery shopping. Normal. Comfortable. Ours. Adrian traveled sometimes for work. Not constantly, but enough that his suitcase lived semi-permanently near the bedroom closet. A few days here, a week there. I never thought much of it. He always called from wherever he was. He always came home smelling like airport coffee and slightly wrinkled dress shirts. That night, a Tuesday in early October, he had been back from a work trip for 3 days. We were settled back into our routine. I was making pasta. He was reading. The dog was asleep under the coffee table. Then my cousin called. Her name is Adele. She works as a medical administrator at one of the hospitals on the east side of the city. Not the one near our house. The other one, the larger one. The one I'd never had reason to visit. She called me from her personal phone, not her work line. And the moment I heard her voice, I knew something was wrong. She told me there had been a car accident. She told me a man had been brought in, badly hurt, and that his ID identified him as my husband. She told me he was in surgery. I laughed. I actually laughed, and I walked into the living room and looked at my husband and said, "Adrian, my cousin thinks you're in the hospital." He looked up from his book, frowned slightly. "What?" I put the phone on speaker. Adele repeated what she'd told me. Adrian listened, expression shifting from confused to concerned, and then he did something I thought was kind at the time. He said, "You should go check. She sounds really scared. It's probably just a mix-up with the ID, but go make sure she's okay." I thought that was thoughtful. I thought that was him being considerate of my cousin's feelings. I didn't think to ask why he didn't come with me. I grabbed my keys and drove across the city. The whole way there, I told myself it was a clerical error. Someone with a similar name, similar ID, a wallet that got mixed up at the scene. These things happen. I told myself I'd walk in, clear everything up, hug Adele, and be home before the pasta water got cold. Adele met me at the entrance. Her eyes were swollen. She grabbed both my hands before she said a word, and that was the first moment I felt real fear move through my body. She walked me down a long corridor, through 2 sets of double doors, to a room just outside the surgical recovery unit. A doctor was waiting for us, a calm, serious man who introduced himself and asked if I was Mrs. Vera Callahan. I said yes without thinking. That's my married name. He told me my husband had been in a serious accident on the highway. He told me the surgery had gone well, but that recovery would take time. He told me I could see him briefly. I followed him into the room, and I saw my husband lying in that hospital bed. Same dark hair. Same scar on his jaw from a bike accident he'd had as a teenager. Same hands. I know his hands. I've held his hands. I would know them anywhere. He was unconscious, breathing through a tube, but it was him. It was him. I stood at the foot of that bed and I felt the floor tilt. Because an hour earlier I had left my husband sitting on our couch reading a book. I grabbed the door frame. Adele touched my arm. I heard myself say very quietly, "There has to be a mistake." But even as I said it, I was staring at the scar on his jaw, and I knew I wasn't looking at a stranger. I didn't stay long. I couldn't. My thoughts were moving too fast and I needed air. I needed to think. I needed to not be standing in a hospital room looking at a man who could not possibly exist. I called Adrian from the parking lot. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, how is she? Did you get it sorted out?" His voice was warm. Normal. The exact voice I had been waking up next to for 4 years. "I saw someone," I said carefully. "Someone who looks a lot like you." A short pause. That's wild. Is your cousin feeling better?" "She's okay." "Good. Come home when you're ready. I saved you some pasta." I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could drive. When I got home, he was exactly where I'd left him, plate of pasta warm on the counter, dog curled up at his feet now. He hugged me when I walked in. His arms felt the same. His heartbeat felt the same against my cheek. I told myself it was stress. I told myself I'd been scared and my brain had played tricks. I told myself lots of things that night, lying awake in the dark while he slept soundly beside me. I went back to the hospital the next morning. Alone. I didn't tell Adrian. The man in recovery was still unconscious. His condition had stabilized, and now that the urgency had passed, the staff were asking questions I didn't know how to answer. The hospital had identified him using his driver's license and 2 credit cards found in his wallet. Everything matched. My husband's name, my husband's address, my husband's face. I looked at his chart. I looked at his hands again. I looked at the scar. I drove home and cooked dinner and smiled at my husband across the table and said nothing. That went on for 2 weeks. Looking back, I can see that I was in a kind of shock that doesn't look like shock from the outside. I wasn't falling apart. I was functioning. I was going to work, sleeping, eating, having normal conversations, but underneath everything was this low, constant vibration of wrongness that I couldn't name and couldn't make stop. I started paying closer attention, not in an obvious way. I didn't want to alarm him, whoever he was, but I watched. I noticed things. He knew everything about our life. He knew where the spare key was hidden, which drawer had the takeout menus, which side of the bed was mine. He remembered the name of my college roommate, the story of how my parents met, the name of the dog we'd had growing up. He laughed at the right jokes. He called my mother on her birthday. But there were moments, small ones. A half-second pause before answering a question he should have answered instantly. A flicker of something unfamiliar in his eyes when he thought I wasn't watching. Once, he reached for a coffee mug in the wrong cabinet, corrected himself immediately, smiled like nothing had happened. Adrian had reached for that mug in the right cabinet every single morning for 3 years. I told myself I was imagining things. I was not imagining things. Adele called me on a Thursday evening. She asked me to come to the hospital again. She said she'd found something and that she needed to show me in person and that I should not tell my husband I was going. The way she said it made my stomach drop. I told him I was meeting a friend for coffee. He kissed my forehead and said to have fun. I drove to the hospital with my hands rigid on the steering wheel. Adele locked the door of her office before she spoke. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "I shouldn't be doing this," she said. "But I've been doing it anyway, because I can't stop thinking about what you told me, about how you left him at home." She pulled up a folder on her computer. She'd been making calls. She'd been quietly checking things that weren't technically her job to check. Adele has always been the kind of person who cannot leave a loose thread alone, and I had never been more grateful for that in my life. She had found records from a private clinic, a small, expensive, very discreet facility on the outskirts of the city. Not a hospital, a clinic that specialized in, as she put it, extensive reconstructive procedures. The kind of place that didn't advertise. The kind of place you'd only find if you knew where to look. She turned the screen toward me. There were intake records, photographs, clinical, procedural, the kind taken before and after reconstructive surgery, And in the first photograph, the before photograph, I recognized a face. Not immediately. It took me a moment. But I knew that face. His name is Seth. He had been Adrian's closest friend since college. Closer than close, the kind of friend who shows up in every story from that decade of Adrian's life. He'd been at our wedding. He'd been at our housewarming. He'd sat across from me at dinner tables dozens of times, and I had never thought about him as anything other than Adrian's old friend, with the easy smile and the too loud laugh. I was looking at a photograph of Seth, and I was looking at records documenting a years-long series of procedures, surgical, painstaking, methodical, that had changed his face into my husband's face. My hands started shaking before I fully understood what I was reading. Adele kept her voice very steady. She told me the procedures had begun nearly 3 years ago. She told me the clinic's records, which she had accessed through channels I decided not to ask too many questions about, included session notes from a psychological evaluation required by the clinic before any major identity-altering work. She read me a line from those notes. The evaluating doctor had flagged an intense fixation on another individual's life circumstances, including their spouse and financial holdings. I made her repeat that. Spouse. Financial holdings. She showed me more. Adrian and I owned property jointly, a small rental unit that had been in Adrian's family. I had recently, at Adrian's suggestion, begun the process of consolidating several financial accounts under joint access. It had seemed like a normal married couple thing to do. Practical. Efficient. Seth had known about all of it. Of course he had. He had been Adrian's closest friend for over a decade. I sat in that chair in Adele's office and I cried for a long time. Not from fear, though I was afraid. From something else. From the feeling of understanding, suddenly and completely, how long this had been happening around me without my knowledge. From the realization that someone had looked at my ordinary, unremarkable, genuinely happy life and decided to take it, not just borrow it. Take it. Adele told me the man in the hospital, the real man in the hospital, my actual husband, had a long recovery ahead of him. The accident had not been random. She didn't say that directly, but she said the details didn't fit a normal highway accident and that she had passed certain concerns along to someone she trusted at the police department. I drove home. Seth was waiting in the living room. He smiled when I walked in. "Good coffee?" he asked. "Great coffee," I said. I went upstairs, ran the shower, sat on the bathroom floor, and figured out what I was going to do. I want to be clear about something, because I've thought about this a lot since. People might wonder why I didn't call the police that night. Why I didn't walk back downstairs and confront him, or run, or do any of the things that seem obvious in hindsight. The answer is that I had no evidence in my hands. I had what Adele had found, which was not nothing, but it was not something I could walk into a police station with and expect to be believed. I had a story about a man who had surgically altered his face to impersonate my husband, who had arranged my husband's accidental near death, who had moved into my home and my life with the goal of accessing my assets. Said out loud, it sounds like something you'd see in a thriller. I needed it to not sound like that. I needed paperwork, timestamps, a chain of evidence that no one could dismiss. So I went downstairs and I smiled and I acted like nothing had changed, and for the next 2 weeks I gathered everything. Adele connected me with a private investigator, a woman named Dr. Kessler had recommended, someone who specialized in exactly this kind of financial and identity fraud. I met her twice, both times telling Seth I was running errands. She was methodical and calm, and she never once looked at me like I was crazy, which I needed more than I can describe. We pulled phone records. We documented the timeline of the procedures at the clinic against the timeline of Adrian's work trips, the trips during which Seth had apparently been watching the house for him, which I now understood had actually been reconnaissance. We found financial transfers from Seth's accounts to the clinic that spanned almost 3 years. We found emails. I read those emails in a parking garage alone, and I had to grip the steering wheel for a very long time afterward. The language in them made my skin crawl. He had written about Adrian and me, about our home, our accounts, our daily schedule, with the detached precision of someone planning a project. He had written about me specifically in ways I will not repeat here because some things don't need to be repeated. The week before everything ended, Seth pushed to finalize a joint account transfer that would have given him complete access to a significant portion of our combined savings and the property deed. He framed it as something we'd been meaning to do. He was calm and reasonable about it, the way he was calm and reasonable about everything, and I realized that was the most frightening thing about him. He was very good at seeming normal. I agreed to meet with our financial advisor to sign the documents. I asked that we do it in person, at the advisor's office, with both of us present. He agreed immediately. He seemed pleased. The morning of the meeting, I forwarded everything, every email chain, every clinic record, every piece of the investigator's report, to the detective Adele had initially contacted. I had a conversation with that detective the week before. She knew what was happening. She knew what that meeting was. We sat in the financial advisor's office. Seth was relaxed, professional, doing the thing he did where he seemed so completely like my husband that I had to keep reminding myself, quietly, carefully, of what I knew. The advisor placed the documents in front of us. Seth reached for the pen. I said, "Before we do this, there's something I need everyone to see." I opened my laptop. I will not pretend that what happened next was cinematic. It wasn't. It was quiet and procedural and, at the end, deeply sad. The footage from the clinic began playing. Seth's hand went still. I watched his face. Watched it do something I can only describe as collapsing inward, all the careful warmth disappearing at once, and underneath it, something cold and unfamiliar that confirmed every doubt I'd ever pushed aside. He said my name. He started to speak. The door opened. 2 detectives walked in. He was arrested that afternoon. The charges were extensive. Identity fraud, financial fraud, conspiracy, and in connection with Adrian's accident, attempted murder. He didn't say anything when they let him out. He looked at me once, just once, and I looked back. I didn't have anything to say to him. I just needed him to know I saw him. The real him, not the face he'd borrowed. Adrian woke up 3 days later. I was there. I was holding his hand when he opened his eyes, and the first thing he said, barely a whisper, was my name. My actual name, the nickname only he uses, the one Seth had never once used in 2 weeks of living in my house. I hadn't even registered that until that moment. I cried. I cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry through any of it, because through all of it I had needed to be functional, and now I didn't. His recovery was slow. There were hard weeks. There are still hard weeks. Rebuilding trust in your own perceptions, in your own memories, in the ordinary moments of your daily life. That is not something that happens quickly. I still sometimes catch myself looking at him and feeling the ghost of that doubt before I push it away. I think that might be something I carry for a long time. Seth is awaiting trial. His attorney has entered a not guilty plea, which, given the volume of documented evidence, I am told is not uncommon in cases like this. I try not to think about him often. I try, mostly successfully, not to think about those emails. What I think about instead is this. The night Adele called me. Terrified, insisting I come to the hospital, she was taking a professional risk. She didn't have to do any of it. The record searching, the late nights, the connections she pulled in. She did it because something felt wrong, and she refused to let that feeling go. I think about that a lot. I also think about the small things. The coffee mug in the wrong cabinet. The nickname, Seth, never used. The half-second pauses. Our instincts notice things before our minds can process them. And I think that matters. I think we should be kinder to our instincts. My name is Vera. I am 32 years old, and I am still learning to trust that the man sleeping beside me is the man I married. Not because of any remaining doubt, but because healing works that way. Slowly. In its own time. He is. I know he is. And the man who tried to take my life learned that some things cannot be stolen. Not the small daily texture of a real marriage. Not 4 years of ordinary mornings and inside jokes and silent understandings. Not a life that belongs to someone else. He tried. He lost everything. We are still here. I've spent a lot of time since everything happened, trying to figure out what I want to take away from it. Not in a tidy, packaged way. Life doesn't really hand you tidy packages, but in the way you slowly make sense of something after it stops being an emergency and starts being a memory. What I keep coming back to is Seth. Not with anger, though the anger was there and it was real, but with something closer to a kind of bewildered sadness. Because Seth spent years, building a plan to take something that wasn't his. He invested time, money, pain, the actual physical pain of surgical procedures, in constructing a version of someone else's life that he could inhabit. And the thing is, he was intelligent. He had to be. What he pulled off required patience and precision and a detailed understanding of another person's world. He used all of that intelligence in service of something that could only ever end one way. That's what I think about, not what he did to me, but what he did to himself. Every choice he made along the way, every clinic appointment, every wire transfer, every careful lie at our dinner table was a choice that narrowed his future. By the time he was sitting across from me in that financial advisor's office, reaching for a pen, he had already been building his own ending for 3 years without knowing it. The plan he believed was almost complete was actually already over. He just hadn't gotten the information yet. I don't think the universe handed him a punishment. I think he constructed one methodically out of his own decisions. That's how it usually works. We tell ourselves that getting away with something means the consequences aren't coming. But consequences aren't always loud or immediate. Sometimes they're just the slow accumulation of who you've chosen to be. What Adele did was the opposite of that. She made a different kind of accumulation. Quiet, unglamorous, professionally risky. She made calls she didn't have to make. She stayed late for a problem that wasn't officially hers to solve. She used her intelligence not to take something but to protect something. And because of that, she changed everything. I think about that distinction a lot. The same qualities: persistence, attention to detail, willingness to go further than required, can be pointed in completely different directions. Seth pointed his toward control and acquisition. Adele pointed hers toward someone she loved. One of them is facing trial. The other one I called last week just to hear her voice. Adrian told me recently that what struck him most, when he finally understood everything that had happened, wasn't the horror of it. It was the fact that I had held it together, that I had gone home, cooked dinner, smiled across a table at a man I knew was not my husband, and spent 2 weeks building a case instead of falling apart. I didn't feel strong during those 2 weeks. I felt terrified and alone and like I was performing a version of my life while the real version was somewhere I couldn't reach. But I made a decision every single morning to keep going, to stay focused, to not let fear make the choices for me. And I think that's what resilience actually is. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to act anyway, one morning at a time, until you get to the other side. We are still healing. That's the honest answer. Some days are easier than others, but we are here, and we are real. And that is more than Seth will have for a very long time.